Hey everybody, welcome back to our series on the Kingdom of Israel. Last time we looked at the divided kingdom, focusing on the northern kingdom, the nation of Israel. And we did talk a little bit about how the two kingdoms divided. Today we're going to focus on Judah, the southern kingdom. This is another way of looking at the divided kingdom, but with all of the kings' names. So right here are the kings of Judah, and over here are the kings of Israel. And all the dotted lines mean a change in dynasty. So you can see lots of changes in dynasty in the northern kingdom of Israel. With Judah, no dotted lines here. It is all in the line of King David. For our purposes, there's lots of kings here. We are just going to focus on three: King Hezekiah, King Manasseh, and King Josiah. So let's get started. Judah, the southern kingdom, some kings faithful and some kings unfaithful. Some kings faithful and some kings unfaithful. This is unlike Israel, northern kingdom, where every single king was unfaithful. So we first look at King Hezekiah. When he became king, there was a lot of idol worship going on in the land before him. So first things first, he cleansed the land of evil. He was not just concerned about Jerusalem, but he was also concerned about his whole kingdom. Maybe some of you need to cleanse your digital collection of evil. Just a little editorial comment there. Let's move on. He paid off the Assyrians. So the Assyrians conquered Israel, northern kingdom, and they were coming for Hezekiah, but he paid them off and they left. But they didn't stay away for long. The Assyrians came back. They really wanted to control the land of Judah, southern kingdom. There's important trade routes there. It was an obvious next step for their empire. They returned. They taunted King Hezekiah in the city of Jerusalem. Hezekiah prays very famously. Hezekiah went to pray with Isaiah, and the word of the Lord said, "Trust in God." Despite the massive army on the outside of the city of Jerusalem, trust in God, and they did, and an angel of death, a plague of death, came upon the Assyrian soldiers, and those that survived it just broke camp, disbanded, and left. And so there was victory. A little point I want to make here is trusting God and looking to God. Even when you don't understand what's going on, even when the future looks fuzzy, it is still important to trust and look to God. One other interesting thing about Hezekiah is he not only trusted God, he also worked hard. And for us as Christians, we are called to work hard and trust God. So before the Assyrians came, something very famous that Hezekiah did, in addition to making more swords and shields and weapons, is he made a tunnel. And here is that's why I'm showing you this picture. Here's what the tunnel looks like. What is so cool is the Bible actually talks about this tunnel, and archaeologists have found the tunnel. So here's the Bible passage, and here they gathered a large group of people who blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. He did a lot of other work getting ready for the Assyrians to come. And then in verse 30, it was Hezekiah who channeled the water. He blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon Spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. So just kind of a pretty cool thing that the Bible clearly talks about his tunnel. Archaeologists have found his tunnel. The next picture is a picture of me in the tunnel. I'm taking the picture on the left, and on the right, you'll see a picture of me coming out of Hezekiah's tunnel. So I'm here looking into the tunnel, and there I am coming out of the tunnel. The tunnel still has water in it, which is kind of cool. Some places of the tunnel are very high, and some places are much lower. One other kind of cool thing about the tunnel is they found that Hezekiah's men started from both directions and met in the middle so that they could build this quicker. Notice that this is underground, it is curved, and they met in the middle. They can tell this by the chisel marks in the stone. This tunnel is an engineering marvel of the ancient world. Now, trust and look to God. Hey, I have a little story for you. You're missing some of the stories by not being in school. So here's a little story in my life about trusting and looking to God. When I was a new associate pastor in Grand Junction, Colorado, I had just finished seminary. I arrived in July, and to be honest with you, the thing that just made me most easy inside, I didn't talk a lot about it, was that I just had a strong desire to get married, to have a family. I was a single guy. I was really busy with the church, and the church was really small, so it didn't seem like there were prospects of meeting anybody. Anyway, that's where I was at in life. Well, in September, once school had started, it was a Monday morning, and I thought I'd go for a bike ride. So I put my bike in my car and drove to this trail, the scenic trail in town. And so I'm biking down this trail, and as I bike down the trail, I see up ahead a bench that's placed there, like a little scenic spot. And then I begin to daydream as I'm biking. Oh, I wish I had that special someone with me. If I did, I would pull my bike off to the side, and she'd be wondering, what is he doing? And we would walk over to this bench. We would sit down, I'd put my arm around her. We wouldn't have to say anything, but just the fact that we were together would make everything so good. So I'm having this little romantic daydream and biking by the bench absolutely alone. It's kind of a depressing thought. Well, I biked to the end of the trail, and at the end of the trail, this is where the Grand River met the Colorado River. This is where the Gunnison River met the Colorado River, thus the Grand Junction of these two rivers, thus the town in which I lived, Grand Junction. Anyway, I checked that out for a while, and it was kind of cool. Then it was time for me to go back. Now, this scenic trail was not a loop, it was just a one-way. So as I am biking back to the car, I remember thinking, I gotta bike past that bench, and the bench just reinforces my loneliness. When I got to the bench, I kind of knew what I should do. I pulled off, I walked over to the bench, and I sat down, and I had a really honest prayer time. And during that prayer time, I, in a sense, just said, God, I trust in you. My life is in your hands. And the most important thing to me is to be a faithful disciple of Jesus. And if that means that I'm single for the rest of my life, so be it, even though you know my desire to be married. And I prayed that prayer to God, that prayer of trust. And when I stood up, something happened. There was the burden lifted. And I just went on knowing that I was in God's hands. I need to trust and look to God. So that was in September. That next February, one cold Sunday morning, as people gathered in the sanctuary for worship, I was walking down the center aisle before the service, and I noticed a young woman there who was visiting. I stopped, said hello, shook her hand, and little did I know, I was shaking the hand of my future wife. Well, of course, we eventually did get married. We moved to Chicago. We went back to Grand Junction a couple years later, and I thought, I need to go to the bench. And so I went to the bench, and there is my gift from God. So here, praying for God to provide and trusting in Him, and here we are. Is that not cool? All right, that's my story for today. Let's move on. Our next king is Manasseh. We went from Hezekiah godly to Manasseh, the most wicked and against God king. Because of his wickedness, and not just him, the wickedness of the people, there was the prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction. And if Jerusalem was destroyed, their nation was done. So this was an awful prophecy, and obviously a lot of people discounted it and ignored it, but nevertheless, there was the prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction. This picture here is showing the sacrifice of a child before a pagan god, and that is something that Manasseh did during his time. Interestingly, though, Manasseh does end up repenting and seeking God at the end of his reign. The most wicked and against God repents and seeks God. Point I want to make here is there is forgiveness with God. However, sin never pays. Sin always has consequences, and the consequence of Jerusalem's destruction did remain. Not during Manasseh's reign, though. So forgiveness and consequences. Before we move on, briefly here, Manasseh, Baal, Asherah poles, he bowed down to the starry hosts and worshiped them. He built altars in the temple. This is, in my opinion, the most satanic type of worship. He sacrificed his children, witchcraft. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord. Interestingly, the king of Assyria came and, in this case, took him prisoner and put a hook in his nose, took him to Babylon, and then he sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before God. And God brought him back to Jerusalem. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. And then his faith had consequences. He got rid of the foreign gods and sought to honor God. Our last king we're looking at is King Josiah. Perhaps you know a person named Josiah. That's a good thing. Josiah was a very good and godly king. So Josiah repaired the temple. He repaired the temple, focusing on worship there. Also during his reign, the book of the law was found. This is quite something, and in just a moment I'll show you the scripture passage and explain more about that. The book of the law was found, and he renewed the covenant. He renewed the covenant. As they read the book of the law, as they understood how they should please God and honor God with their lives, he renewed the covenant. They celebrated Passover. They said, Lord, forgive us. We want to follow you. And just a point that I want to highlight here is recommitting life to God. The renewal of the covenant is like a recommitting of life to God. And for you in your life, maybe you know of times, maybe you can recall times in your life. Maybe it was a youth meeting, a church service. Maybe it was a summer camp, a winter camp. For some students, it's just an amazing prayer time in their room where you met with God in an unusually strong way. And during those times, God is calling us to recommit our lives to God. Recommit our lives to God. Finding the book of the law. Hilkiah, the high priest, while they were repairing the temple, okay, Josiah had the temple repaired. While they're doing that, Hilkiah says, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. Friends, they had lost the book of the law. They had lost part of the Bible. Do you get it? It was gone, missing. They'd had no copies of this. I'm not exactly sure, what specific books. Was it just the laws of Moses? Just the books of Moses or more than that? I don't know. But they had lost part of the Bible. I am thinking that when Manasseh was at his crazy evil days, that some faithful priest took a scroll of the book of the law and hid it in the temple, while Manasseh might have been destroying other copies. Well, this priest probably died, didn't tell anybody, and it was lost. But they found the Bible, which is fairly important, not fairly, hugely important. And Josiah was such a godly man that when the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes in grief because they were not following God like they should. And he wanted to obey God with all of his heart. So he led his people in recommitting their lives to the Lord. Those are the notes for Judah, southern kingdom, in which some kings were faithful and some were unfaithful. I hope you learned something, and I hope you were also encouraged in your faith today.